Hi, and welcome to Secretly Society Podcasts, profiling different artists and stories from the catalogues of Secretly Canadian, Jaguar, Dead Oceans, or one of our partner labels. I'm Tom Davies, and I'll be one of your hosts. In this mini-series, we will be continuing our deep dive into Jaguar's recent comprehensive chronicle of DeYarmond Edison. In the first two episodes, we heard from the author, a friend of the band and executive producer of the DeYarmond Edison official box set Epoch, Grayson Haver Currin, as he guided us through the humble beginnings of a quartet comprising Brad Cook, Phil Cook, Joe Westerland, and Justin Vernon, otherwise known as DeYarmond Edison. We began to weave through how the band was pushing themselves to new limits after moving to Raleigh, North Carolina, from booking their first shows to giving each member the freedom to wanderlust through their musical interests. We are back with the final two episodes. Stay tuned to complete the story of DeYarmond Edison in these next episodes, as Grayson will lead us to the ultimate breaking of the quartet and the creation of two bands that have reshaped music as we know it.
My name is Grayson Haver Currin. In the summer of 2005, I graduated from college in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. I was writing about music for a local newspaper, and 3 months later, a band of 4 friends and then all their buds moved to town, and soon enough, they became my favorite band. Their name was DeYarmond Edison, and the band's members were Brad Cook, Phil Cook, Justin Vernon, and Joe Westerland. They also became some of my best friends, and their music and their friendship changed my life. They broke up a year later, and that year of their existence was a period of intense artistic ambition for them. They tried to change their sound, they tried to change how they worked with one another, and that eventually ended up breaking them apart. And more or less the moment they broke up, they started 2 different bands. Megafaun, who made these incredibly strange folk rock records, and the other was Bon Iver. So after that, I pitched these guys and said, the music you made together as the band DeYarmond Edison has never really come out in a proper way. So we should fix that. And 4 years later, we're finally fixing that. Epoch is a 5 LP, 4 CD box set with a ridiculously long book that I wrote about my friends and what they did together and what they've since done apart. Chapter 6. Early in April 2006, DeYarmond Edison left Raleigh to return to the Midwest for the first time as a band since their farewell concerts. This trip home represented a new era of independence for DeYarmond Edison. It was their first tour of any real length since leaving Wisconsin, and it came after they began blowing up their self-perception, only to start again. They had a new financial goal, too. In the 5 weeks since their second residency set, they'd made 200 hand-numbered double-disc sets of the residency, the yellow CDRs packaged in a cardboard gatefold, alongside liner notes that methodically explained the project. Phil burned them one by one on Kyle's computer, nearly breaking it in the process. Late in the first set at Mabel Tainter, Brad informed the crowd they were not only performing much of that material that night, but also releasing their first live album in the lobby. They hoped to apply the profits from the Bickett Residency to buying a van. We realized, wow, we worked our asses off for that residency show, and if anyone deserved to see that stuff, it's probably you guys, he told the crowd. You guys put up with us for 8 years. DeYarmond Edison was thrilled to be back home. Justin told the capacity crowd just that at least half a dozen times, while they made jokes about their high school band teacher and Mount Vernon shows of yore between songs. They were also eager to show the familiar audience just what they'd learned and how they'd evolved in North Carolina. Opener I've Been Drinking was twice as energetic as it had been in Raleigh, the band practically howling every word, and Justin sliding across his strings as though trying to break them. They told the room they'd learned The Banks of Ohio from North Carolina's Blue Sky Boys, then proceeded to pronounce the name in an exaggerated Wisconsin brogue. Before beginning the second set with The Longest Train, Phil told the crowd, "We moved to North Carolina, where I've met some real, honest-to-goodness folk musicians." Brad gets choked up again during Will the Circle Be Unbroken. And they revel especially in the urban ennui of the Velvet Underground's All Tomorrow's parties, as though it were an indicator of the creative possibilities that awaited small city kids moving anywhere else. Phil's insistent banjo, Justin's barbed feedback, Joe's triumphant yell, Brad's lumbering bass. Together, it tells their family and friends where they wanted to go. The cacophony slowly sublimates into a satisfied mind, Justin's falsetto voice even more tender and confident than it had been in Raleigh. In an instant, that segue illustrates both their allegiance to songs and their budding adventurousness with them too. After Phil goes wild during their unrecorded gospel rock staple, Please Find Me Here, taking extended harmonica and piano solos, he sheepishly apologizes for the abuse he's done to Mabel Tainter's grand piano. "It's out of tune now," Joe quips with delight. They pull up short during Abel and Cain, not only lopping the piece in half, but also steering clear of the distortion and discursion of the version they'd played in Raleigh only 5 weeks earlier. It is purely nice, with Justin, Phil, and Brad outlining its Frizzell-like melody as Joe seems to push for something more in the background. That hesitancy also creeps into Afro Blue, which ends the first set. Joe drives the song harder than he ever had, emphasizing the ecstatic clave meter. But Justin treats the piece with the reverence of a jazz standard, pulling back the very moment he starts to rip the theme apart. Midway through, when the tune begins to suggest a broken mirror version of itself, Phil actually leads the charge, tussling with Joe while Justin nearly disappears until the band settles back into the groove. Neither Joe's more obtuse work from the residency nor Brad's Reich homage surface during the Midwestern pilgrimage. Joe's parents noticed the disconnect that night.
They weren't as happy as they'd been before. Each one started to have some pretty significant preferences in how they thought the music should go.
And what I sensed at Mabel Tainter was just that they were on a spectrum, with Justin and Phil requiring more structure to their music, certainly than Joe and maybe Brad. I don't know, it was like there were these four guys that were coming up with four different sounds.
Another division began to slip beneath DeYarmond Edison's surface that night too, though no one in the audience, and perhaps even the band itself, could have known. In their first 9 months in Raleigh, the band had been too busy to write many new songs. They were finding jobs, forming friendships, developing household routines, and rehearsal schedules. They were entering a new scene with a story tradition while trying to reimagine their sound entirely. The new setting offered its own kind of inspiration, but who had time to write? DeYarmond Edison left Eau Claire with a tandem of tunes they hadn't cut for Silent Signs, the yearning Red Shoes and the spectral Epoch, plus a few more odds and ends. And in Raleigh, Joe presented Abel and Cain not long before the second residency. But slowly, Justin began to put brooding new words to paper. Using imagistic fragments, like the opening line, "Ring on the Bar," to stitch together the feeling of being haunted by a romantic ghost, Song for a Lover of Long Ago represented a transformational moment for Justin as a writer. He'd been working on it for months. Prismatic details framed a hurt that felt bigger than a specific heartbreak, a lesson inherited from Richard Buckner, and the same idea that later animated For Emma Forever Ago. And the glacial piano ballad Easy predicted an inevitable heartbreak to come and pled for mercy. When the time comes and you need to let me down, he sang in a torch song so faint it felt like a mere smolder. I will let you go without a sound, just let me down easy. Alongside Red Shoes, those songs form a sort of suite in Menominee, divided only by the energetic jolt of Ain't No More Cain. The songs are still inchoate that the lyrics are unfinished, with extra verses and unsettled lines. But the music is largely realized. Song for a Lover of Long Ago slowly lopes above scraped cymbals and brooding atmospherics, while Easy curls up on the piano bench beneath sighing steel guitar and harmonica that recalls Talk Talk's Spirit of Eden on a budget. Roaring, the hometown crowd relishes its approachability.
In the time comes when the weeds grow.
Debuting 2 new songs back at home seemed promising, of course, of a piece with the band evolving at a radical pace. But Justin would soon record parallel versions of Song for a Lover of Long Ago, one with the band and the other alone, at a new house he was talking about moving into with his girlfriend, Christy Smith. He would record the only version of Easy there, making it the centerpiece of Hazeltons. It was his 3rd solo album in 5 years, so it might have seemed no big deal. But in their mass migration, the distinction between band songs and solo songs had seemingly vanished. What else would they play, if not those new tunes? Justin was surprised 15 years later when I told him DeYarmond Edison had played Easy together in Wisconsin. Oh, from Hazeltons, he said? Its lyrics, after all, portended a messy breakup, romantic or fraternal or otherwise.
He always was making stuff. Justin didn't accidentally do any of this shit. He made more songs in the time we were in Eau Claire on his computer than most people do in their lifetime. But you could sense there was a bigger tension. Maybe we were all realizing like our narrative needed to evolve. I will live without a sound.
Chapter 7. The tour cost DeYarmond Edison something else that was invaluable: time. Their rehearsals before their March 1st show at Bickett Gallery were some of the most intense of their careers. Not only were they learning new material, but each member was sharing a skill he had, in some cases, spent a lifetime honing. There had been library visits and singing lessons and written scores.
I remember there was excitement around the first one, and then as soon as we started to try and have to pick a second one, like, everyone was kind of like, oh, God, I mean, what are we doing? Like, what are we all individually taking away from this? You know what I mean? I feel like a huge question was asked of all of us internally and collectively.
Their practices were, if not altogether miserable, at least a slog. On tape, they debate the mechanics of each exercise and test different metaphors for what they are doing: spaceships, sport teams, screws. The residency was meant to make everyone comfortable, but they no longer sound motivated by that prospect, just tied to it.
I would come home and just be like, I don't think this is my place anymore, and feeling like I wasn't connecting with these guys as much as I thought I was. You know, it was still very forced at times.
The night of April 22nd was rainy and warm. Still, the crowd that filtered into Bickett was comparable to the previous performance, with folks scattered around the floor and leaning against gallery walls. Where the March show had begun with an exclamation mark, this one arrived via an ellipsis, with Phil softly playing an accordion melody as weekend banter slowly subsided. He tentatively began singing My Beautiful Reward, an early 90s Springsteen favorite about finding existential relief in love, drugs, faith, or fallacy. It was another assignment from Justin, again pushing Phil to trust in his voice. Unlike its predecessor, the set did not come in individualized compartments. One member would lead one piece at a time, then recede, as though passing a baton. In some respects, it was just another show. Joe began explaining 2 scenes, an improv game in which the band splits into a pair of duos, Brad and Justin, Phil and Joe, and allows disparate musical ideas to clash and merge. The 2 teams mostly seemed only to be playing in the same room, barely interacting. That moodiness and reluctant undercurrent defined the entire night. By the time they'd finished setting up for Cybernetic Meadow, Brad's electronically ruptured reading of the Richard Brautigan poem all watched over by machines of loving grace, they all seemed exhausted. It was only the night's third selection. The most telling such moment arrived when Justin began to introduce something he had just written. For these shows, everyone agreed to stick to their respective zones, at least for the start. They'd make an honest effort to learn new techniques, then merge them into new music for the final shows if they felt compelled. Justin confessed, however, that he couldn't wait. The piece, a 6-minute work for guitar, piano, melodica, electronics, and percussion played in F, was at least gorgeous. The instruments dissolved into each other, their intermingled rhythms and textures making you forget where one ended and another began. Transportive but emotionally ambiguous, it clearly built on Brad's contribution. That was the goal, of course, but that moment of tension exposed another possible hurdle. Could everyone let go of their entrenched interest enough for the band to use their new skills in novel ways? Maybe not. The March residency at Bickett showed how vast the possibilities for DeYarmond Edison were. The 4 members knew enough to play 20th century composition and old-time music, to rip into free jazz and float into falsetto soul. And they trusted one another enough to submit to their respective lessons, to internalize what they were being offered. After only 2 months, they'd made astonishing progress. There were incredible moments in April, too. Brad's memory-based interpretation of his father's Windchime Garden, Paul's Park, was an evocative and sublime piece of electronic abstraction. Phil's little instrumental became the template for Lazy Suicide, Megafaun's first anthem. Justin's timbral layering during his Pulse exercise emerged years later, more fully formed, as a touchstone of Bon Iver's albums after Forever Ago. Joe's versatility and playfulness were prescient revelations. But DeYarmond Edison's April residency suggested they were again stuck between stations, trying to find the divide between going too far or not going far enough. Too much growth too soon would surely rip them apart. Too little, and they'd squander the momentum they'd found in their new city. They ended the night with a gentle version of What Are They Doing in Heaven Today, a wistful hymn from the mysterious zither-playing traveling preacher Washington Phillips. It is a song about the sort of homesickness you cannot overcome, because friends and places disappear. They each took a verse, uniting for the weary and gorgeous chorus. Justin's voice wavered during his lines, as though he were already thinking about some other place he'd rather be. "We're going to the Midwest for a week," he said with a newfound pep when it was over. "And then we're coming back. We're playing Kings on May 5th. Those were the last words of DeYarmond Edison's residency. They would never play another full concert at Bickett Gallery again.
This podcast is supported by Secretly Society, a record club offering the best new albums in exclusive, limited edition vinyl colours, delivered to your door each month, with perks like free shipping, members-only discounts, and first dibs on rare finds. Secretly Society is a record club for new collectors and crate diggers alike. Sign up and become a member wherever you are in the world. Just head on over to secretlystore.com.
Chapter 8. A day after DeYarmond Edison's half-hearted third residency show at Bickett, they'd loaded into a van for a 5-show trek that would take them as far west as Iowa City. I sidled up to the van, pulled against the side of the house in a little gravel parking lot. "How did it go?" I asked no one in particular, squinting in the sunlight. As everyone else milled around, grabbing bags, Justin finally sighed. "Good," he grunted, never pausing as he unpacked. "I just wish we were doing it all the time." Nearly 15 years later, I finally learned why my new friends had seemed so uncharacteristically testy. Just a few hours earlier, they'd had a fight about their future, and as it turned out, their end. During the southbound drive to Raleigh, this question, "So, now what?" morphed into a heated existential debate, prompted by Justin's revelation that he was weeks away from finishing a solo recording. The rest of the band, of course, knew Justin had been working on songs of his own since they left Eau Claire in 2005. They had played Easy and Song for a Lover of Long Ago at Mabel Tainter. And Justin had maintained a solo recording practice since the days of Mount Vernon. Still, these recordings seemed almost clandestine. Though DeYarmond Edison had a dedicated rehearsal space, Justin captured these songs in his hovel of a bedroom on Everett, and in the same house where he'd been working with Nola on their album. He also recorded some of it at 810 Farrell Drive, the little bungalow where Christy lived and where he would soon move. He once played a new song called Hazelton for Brad in his bedroom, but he mostly kept these songs out of plain sight. DeYarmond Edison's struggle to write new material of its own made them wonder why they weren't playing and recording Justin's songs as a group. They had left home to be a band after all, not a band with a lead singer who had a solo project. When Justin revealed what he had already finished in the van, tempers flared.
We had stopped to get gas somewhere, and Justin was telling us about Christy and about Kim's wedding and how he wanted to put out this solo album that he had been working on. And I just remember him playing us some songs, and I just sort of remember Joey being more annoyed and confused, why don't we play these? This sucks, Justin. These songs are good. I'd rather play this.
Where the residencies had motivated Joe, Brad, and Phil to think of themselves as equal contributors to and even songwriters for DeYarmond Edison, it had challenged the role Justin had always played: to write the songs and sing them. For Joe, Justin's music, apart from DeYarmond Edison, felt like revanchism, an attempt to reclaim for himself what he had lost in full band compromises.
Justin had a whole world of music carved out for himself. I think I also felt threatened by it. I think I also felt like he's doing it without us, but he needs us to, we need to all need each other to be present for every step of this thing,
But Justin didn't want to debate every decision with the band that was becoming more democratic. He wanted to make the choices and to gauge where he was as a singer, songwriter, and arranger for himself after the educational immersion of the residency.
God, I must have been seemed like such a dick sometimes. I was a dick. I mean, it's just why can't we play these songs that you're working on? And I guess I must have just said no. I don't want to share. I don't want to have to not tell you what I think should be played at the drums. I don't want to have to do this with you guys. I want to do something on my own and mix it and make something that I can mix and feel cool about.
These new songs were focused, each anchored to a specific conceit that tied to the very approaches the band had explored during the residency. In Hazelton, for instance, Justin had multi-tracked his voice so that every element of his range intersected, including his newly excavated falsetto. The keening pleas of frail cell emptied into dizzying drums, snarling electric guitars, and sharp notes plucked above the resonator's nut. Sure, DeYarmond Edison had played Song for a Lover of Long Ago, but Justin's version featured a whiff of field recordings and a bit of processed vocals. Lessons learned from Joe and Brad, respectively, during the residency. Justin was headed where DeYarmond Edison intended to go, but without the rest of the band.
I'm really surprised with this album. We always knew he was doing it. It's just that collection of songs felt like they were good, and not the less than DeYarmond songs, which is what all of his earlier ones felt like. They were just all of his other ideas that didn't fit our band. They were just sort of half-baked, even if I loved them.
The friction over the material actually reassured Justin. DeYarmond Edison's interest meant he was morphing in ways that fit their collective goals. After their debate in the van, Justin hoped these songs might represent a new beginning for DeYarmond Edison, especially if they incorporated more of them into their own set. He began to see it like Joe.
Well, yeah, Hazelton's certainly the main precursor to me doing something on my own at that point, even though I was heavily involved with the band.
It is impossible to overstate how much of a step forward Hazelton's represented for Justin, and by extension, the potential of DeYarmond Edison's collective evolution. These 7 songs are as risky and imaginative as the stuff Akron Family, Caliphone, or the Sea and Cake were making at that moment, if not always fully realized. During game night, for instance, Justin plays a simple riff over a clattering drum beat. then answers its call with a series of shimmering variations. When the drums vanish, he harmonizes 3 lines about gambling, then brings the beat back for the second half. It's an absurdly simple but magnetic concept, undermining his own previous conception of songwriting. Liner, on the other hand, drifts back towards Silent Signs, with big acoustic guitars buttressed by a simple meter. But during the verses, Justin begins with his husky baritone, only to slide seamlessly into his fragile falsetto. He uses 2 modes of falsetto here, Justin high and John Jacob Niles high, during Frail Cell, deploying the upper register to air parenthetical rejoinders to the central lyric. For the climactic coda, he yells the title in that tone over near belligerent strums, an idea that would resurface on For Emma Forever Ago.
It's certainly the confidence that was built from Brad and the other guy saying, hey, that sounds really cool. It certainly was not lost on me, and it certainly brought some of that back to some of the hazeltons crap, and obviously...
That's not all he brought back. Frail Cell begins with a twinkle of electronic processing, a skill he'd acquired during the residency. And until that point, Justin was mostly a commanding vocalist, singing from a perch of confidence. But above the out-of-tune piano drift of Easy, he sounds inquisitive, his voice suddenly as uncertain about the future as his lyrics of pending heartache. It embraces Phil's vocal hesitancy from the residency, especially when singing Springsteen. The voice can ask questions just as much as it can provide answers, Justin seems to have realized.
If you let me down, easy.
The apogee, though, is the opening title track, a sly exercise in how much intricacy you can fit into something that sounds like just another acoustic tune. The prismatic picking pattern, which would reappear in Bon Iver's Holocene, shimmers like DeYarmond Edison's Steve Reich studies, with Justin thumbing the bass line to reinforce the slowly loping rhythm. His voice swaggers as if he's belting out a song learned from Alan Lomax. About 100 seconds into Hazelton, 2 vocal lines, one high, one low, begin to interweave, transmuting the song's incantations against anxiety into distinct incarnations. And then, toward the finale, extra vocal layers create the illusion of surround sound. Put on headphones and you can hear the rough edges of Justin's samples of himself, clicking as he builds a choir of 1. You wreck and then you run, one stratum repeats nervously, as if foretelling the series of breakups coming his way.
Settle up, we're calling up the pain. Singing at the single at the string.
And as DeYarmond Edison started to talk about ordering a pricey second pressing of Silent Signs discs a year after its release, Hazelton's was homemade and cheap. Justin never inquired about a manufacturer. He creased 13-inch pieces of cardstock at the middle and printed lyrics, credits, and gratitude on one side, like a church program or a playbill. There were incorrect dates and spelling errors. The Hannah of Hannah Myophilia never got her second H.
But he made 100 of them. He didn't try to get signed. It wasn't like a thing, you know. He also wasn't like, I've got this solo project I'm trying to do. He was literally like, I'm putting out my 5th CD by myself now.
Mm-hmm.
He had put out more albums of his own than he had DeYarmond albums.
No one expected it to stay that way.